I wanted to do a follow-up on the flood of 93, a part 2. In my continuing research in the Great Flood of 93, it's brought up some anomalies, I guess is the best way to put it, that are making my investigation more complicated than I expected. Of course, you want to do a good job and make sure you have sources, other sources to support your conclusions. And I did, but it's I posted that video um, on May 22nd. Okay, and I did a week and a half of research. I mean, I was on the internet constantly looking at this and that and the other. And just to go over, at the www.weather.gov, they have a page called The Great Flood. And it talks about, the fall through summer incessant rain that created this great flood in the Missouri and upper Mississippi River basins, covering 400,000 square miles, 9 states, and lasting in some locations nearly 200 days. During June through August, rainfall surpassed 12 inches across the eastern Dakotas, southern Minnesota, eastern Nebraska, Wisconsin, Kansas, Iowa, Missouri, Illinois, and Indiana. They experienced rain in that July for 20 days when normal is 8 to 9. And I'm sure the amount of rain was probably greater as well. There were 50 flood deaths, but I'm sure there are probably some deaths that are related to the flood that they don't mention, like injuries or traumas or, whatever, stress. Hundreds of levees failed along the Mississippi and Missouri rivers. Damages are around like 15 billion. Trains were no longer working. Bridges were out. The entire crops of soybean and corn or whatever else, all lost. What was it? 75 towns completely underwater, I do believe. And, trying to explain to you that, this is a flood I don't remember. And it's considered a benchmark. It's considered the flood of all floods in its severity and impact. So, when I wanted to find out, additional information about what's going on in the country and in the weather for that year, and I find out there's a severe drought and heat wave going on in the Southwest, and that doesn't really make sense to me, because there's no mention of it, and yet it's got to be like part of that whole scenario. And anyway, let me get on with this. Like I said, I searched for a week and a half, and I didn't find a lot. Articles were very, very rare. If there were articles in other papers, like locally where I live, they were just repeat verbatim of another report done back east. I mean, there was no. It's like oh well, this happened, and go on with your day. I know the computer remembers your searches, even though you clear cache and stuff. But generally, when I did these searches, I had to search on flood of 1993 to find articles on the Great Flood of 1993. So, I mean, that's one thing that was like, I'm just like going, that's weird. That's very strange. And now we have an article from Life Science And it's called History Repeats Great Flood of 1993. And they're talking about April and May 2011. Now, the states impacted by this tremendous flood shifts down slightly in the country. So it's like Illinois, Missouri, Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana. So it shifted down the country a bit. Same kind of rivers having the same kind of problems. In 1993, Clinton, who was just put into office, declares the 1993 flooded disaster area. And in 2011, President Obama declared the western counties of Kentucky, Tennessee, and Mississippi federal disaster areas. So, and for the first time in 37 years, the Morganza spillway was open on May 14th, deliberately flooding 4,600 square miles of rural Louisiana to save most of Baton Rouge and New Orleans. Now we see they did something similar in the 1993 flood to save some businesses. Okay, and in 2011 it was pretty bad because these storms, unlike the 1993 flood, which was like over a long period of time, this was a shorter, more intense storm systems hitting them, and they had 14 people killed in Arkansas and 392 across the 7 states in the previous storms. Only about 2,600 homes were evacuated as opposed to 50,000 in the 1993 flood. So we have some differences. But we have, some records down there being broken for how much rain they received. So from April 14th to 16th, the storm system responsible for one of the largest tornado outbreaks in U.S. history also produced large amounts of rainfall across southern and midwestern United States, and that's in 2011. And another thing that happened that causes loss of life is the flash flooding that they had. And they consider that one of the 500-year-old floods along the Mississippi. Okay, and then I found an article. That 2011 one is compared to the Great Flood of, it says the actual name of the article is History Repeats Great Flood of 1993.html, and that's the 2011 flood. So that's still compared as a benchmark of severe flooding in this country. And I found another that article about 2009 article about them worrying about the flooding of that year being a repeat of the 1993 flood, another comparison to the Great Flood of 1993. Also very severe. And then, lucky me, I find Mississippi River floods of 2019 on Wikipedia. And they're talking about the temporary flood barriers in Burlington, Iowa failed on June 1st, 2019. So we're having some real trouble now. Major flood stage was exceeded in Burlington, Iowa for 62 days compared to the previous record in 93. And the river stage of 23.5 feet is the 4th largest on record. Hannibal, Missouri is 30.2 feet, and the record is 31.8 feet in 1993. So, we're having history repeating itself. That's not good. NASA even has 2 cents to throw in. And they say this month's flooding, so this is a new article, is reminiscent in the Midwest, reminiscent of the Great Flood of 1993, weather officials now say. While a repeat of 1993 can't be ruled out, they say this year is unlikely to match that colossal disaster. Still the benchmark. Okay? And yet, when I searched before about the 1993 flood, none of these articles came up comparing any other floods to this big flood. And it's it's hard to express in words the weirdness that you feel when you start doing this, and you see the paradoxes and the lack of continuous information that should exist. But several of the 93 records have been broken this year, but they're not like, they're like at levels and stuff that are temporary. So we look at hindsight's 2020, right? Supposedly. There's a man who's NOAA. I'm going to look up what that is. I'll put it in the description what the NOAA is. But the administrator at the time, Dr. James Baker, assumed that we would have learned lessons from this. And I quote, "Although the Great Flood of 1993 has caused devastating human, environmental, and economic impacts, the lessons learned will guide us in providing improved services and benefits to the nation in the future." But now, more people live in these areas than ever, and few projects to improve the levees have been undertaken. For example of lessons not learned, they say the town of Gulfport, Illinois, was inundated by 10 feet of water this month when a levee failed. The levee had been deemed safe by local officials and FEMA. Only 28 of the 750 residents had flood insurance. And Gerald Galloway, professor of engineering at the University of Maryland, said a few months after Hurricane Katrina, the half-life of the memory of a flood is very short. So, makes me think, well, why hasn't more been done? Is it because some of the people in charge don't remember the flood of 93? Like I didn't? So there's also this discrepancy about 2009 flood and 2008 flooding, that there seem to be the same event but at different times, and I'm a little confused, and I might look into that or not, because they say they had similar storms during the summer of 2008, and yet they talk about the 2009 flooding, and it's like, which is it? Both of them or one of them? And I thought, well, okay. I look and see if there's any mention at any weather site of 93 flood if I don't search for the 93 flood. Look up the year. No mention of the 1993 flood, no mention of the severe drought and heat wave in the Southwest, but we got a plus, we got a bonus. We have the severe blizzard that strikes the eastern U.S., bringing a record snowfall and other severe weather all the way from Cuba to Quebec. This is a huge, huge blizzard. It's horrible. And I find that on the peoplehistory.com. I find it on all the weather sites. I don't find the 93 flood unless I search specifically for it. So, what's up with that? It's almost like I found this information on the flood accidentally, or if that's possible. But I can tell you this. The flood of 1993 will remain for me a Mandela effect, a historical event that did not exist for me in my past. Is it all coincidence that the most recent flooding and the flooding of 2009 and 2011 are being compared to the Great Flood of 1993, even surpassing some records? This kind of synchronicity to me happens to me. It just, well, keep looking, keep learning, keep asking questions. Skook out.